1001 Questions and Answers on General History by Benjamin Hathaway. Chapter 9. Where is England? West of Europe, separated from the mainland by the English Channel and Strait of Dover. What does Great Britain include? England, Scotland, and Wales. Into how many periods is English history divided? 5. What are they? The prehistoric, the Roman, the Saxon, the Norman, and Royal. How long did the prehistoric age last? From Antiquity to the invasion by the Romans under Caesar, 55 BC. What record have we of the aboriginal inhabitants? Only the mounds, with their implements of stone and bronze. How long did the Roman period last? From 55 BC to 449 AD. What did the Romans do for the country? Made improvements, built roads and bridges, and introduced Christianity. Who ravaged the country during this time? The wild Celts from the north made invasions, while the Roman legions were called back to Italy. Who assisted the Britons in driving out the Romans? The Germans, under two leaders, Hengist and Horsa. What reward did the Germans get? Tracts of land, and especially the island of Thanet. How did the Germans begin to act? As conquerors, rather than friends. What did they finally do? They established 7 kingdoms in different parts of the island, named collectively the Saxon Heptarchy. What became of the Britons? They were henceforth called Welsh, and driven to the mountains on the west coast of the island. What was the name of some of the German tribes who invaded Britain? Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Why was Britain called England? The land of the Angles, or England, modernized into England. How long did the Saxon period last? From 449 AD to 827 AD. What danger now threatened England? The Danes, or Northmen, were coming from the north. In their light boats they ascended the rivers, and landing, seized horses and scoured the country to plunder and slay. Who partially converted the Saxons to Christianity? St. Augustine and several monks, commissioned by Pope Gregory the Great. How many houses governed England during the Norman period, which was 827 AD to 1399 AD? 4. What were they? Saxon, Danish, Norman, and Plantagenet. Who was the greatest Saxon king? King Alfred. What is said of his reign? He expelled the Danes, and restored tranquility to the country. According to tradition, a gold bracelet could be left hanging by the roadside, without anyone daring to touch it. What great things did he accomplish? He founded the University of Oxford, improved the laws of the kingdom, and established schools for the education of the people. What did the Danes do a century later? They came in greater numbers than before, and the Danish king Canute won the English crown. Who followed the Danes? The Saxons were restored for 25 years. What battle ended the Saxon rule? The Battle of Hastings. Who was the hero of this battle? William, Duke of Normandy, called William the Conqueror. Where and when was he crowned? At Westminster Abbey, on Christmas, 1066 AD. How did the new king treat the English? Kindly, though he favored the Normans in military and official positions. What may be said of William's life? It was one of constant turmoil from enemies. What custom did he institute? Ringing the curfew bell in the evening as a signal that the people should extinguish their lamps and fires, either to prevent conflagration or secret assemblies of those who were hostile to the government. What was one of his most useful acts? Causing the compilation of the Domesday Book, which was a register of all of the estates in the kingdom. What is said of William as a sportsman? He was a great lover of hunting, and had forests built for that purpose. He laid waste a tract of country extending 30 miles, driving out the inhabitants, demolishing houses, and even churches, but making no compensation for the injury. Who succeeded him? William II, surnamed Rufus the Red, from the color of his hair. What great enthusiasm seized the people of the world during the reign of William II? The First Crusade. Who was among the leaders in the crusade? Robert of Normandy, the eldest son of William the Conqueror. What was the cause of the crusade? Palestine had been conquered by the Turks, who ill-treated the Christian pilgrims to the holy places. What effect did this treatment have on the Christian world? All Christendom arose to arms to take the sepulchre of Christ from the unbelievers. Were they successful? After a bloody siege of Jerusalem and a terrible massacre of infidels and Jews, they gained possession of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded. How did William II come to his death? After a reign of 13 years, he was accidentally shot while hunting in the New Forest, 1100. The people viewed this as a just retribution, for when the conqueror had destroyed the homes of the Saxons, his son miserably perished. What effect did the union of the Saxon and the Norman qualities have upon the English race? The blending of the Saxon independence with the Norman skill and learning gave new life and enterprise, a firmer government, and more permanent institutions. What is said of the power of the barons? It was very great. Their castles became mere robber nests, and they plundered the common people without mercy. Who succeeded the Norman kings? The Plantagenets, Henry II, the first of them, becoming king in 1154. What is meant by Plantagenet? Count of Anjou, Henry's father, always wore a sprig in his cap. The sprig was of Genesta, the common broom of Anjou, hence he was nicknamed the Plantagenet. Was this name given to his descendants? It was, to the whole line, who ruled for 245 years. What did Henry II do for law and order? He organized an army, destroyed the castles of the tyrannical nobles, and created new barons, who, being English, were ready to make common cause with the nation. How did he offend his people? By his quarrel with Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, caused by his effort to regulate ecclesiastical authority and make it subservient to civil power. By whom was Henry succeeded? Richard the Lionhearted. When did he rule or wear the crown of England? From 1189 AD to 1199 AD. Who was Richard? A Frenchman, a crusader, a poet, and a hero. What was his character? A hero in the Third Crusade, a hater of unbelievers. Of his 10 years' reign, how long was he in England? About 1 year. Where did Richard go? Embarked with an army for the Holy Land. What army joined him? The French, making in all 100,000 men. What was his success abroad? He conquered the Isle of Cyprus and the seaport of Acre, and several other cities, but was prevented in his attack on Jerusalem by the dissensions and desertion of his French allies under King Philip. What was the result of the pilgrimage? King Richard made a truce with Saladin, Sultan of Egypt, thereby securing several Mediterranean ports, with freedom of pilgrimage to the Christians. What happened at home during this time? King Philip, who had deserted him, had returned, and was assisting Richard's brother John in the attempt to subdue all Richard's dominions. What did Richard do on hearing this news? He started for home in haste. He landed on the coast of the Adriatic and commenced his journey through Europe, disguised as a merchant, 1192 AD. What happened to him in Vienna? He was recognized by his enemy, the Duke of Austria, and imprisoned. He escaped by paying a large ransom. The English people were forced to give 1/4 of their incomes and even to pawn the church plate. On his release, what did he do? Returned to England, forgave his enemies, and expelled King Philip from his dominions. He was killed by one of his servants in the year 1199 AD. Who succeeded King Richard? King John, 1199 AD to 1216 AD. What was the character of his reign? It was brutal and exacting. He imposed taxes at pleasure, wronged the poor, and plundered the rich. What did this bring about? The whole nation rose in insurrection, and the barons with their forces marched against London and took it. What did they compel the king to do? To grant the famous Great Charter, Magna Carta, at Runnymede. What may be said of the Magna Carta? It was the basis of the English Constitution, and as the kings were always trying to break it, they have been compelled, during succeeding reigns, to confirm its provisions 36 times. What was one of the most important articles of the Magna Carta? That no delay should take place in doing justice to everyone, and no free man should be taken or imprisoned, dispossessed of his free tenement, outlawed or banished, unless by the legal judgment of his peers. Who succeeded King John? His son, Henry III, 1216 to 1272 AD. What is said of Henry's reign? It was noted for civil war. The House of Commons was established, a branch of the English legislature, which has proved the chief bulwark of the political and civil liberty of the country. Who succeeded Henry III? Edward I, 1272 to 1307 AD. What promise did he make the Welsh? To give them a ruler born in their own land, who could not speak a word of French or English. Did he keep his promise? He did, in the person of his own son, who was born in their castle the day previous. To what custom did this give rise? Calling the eldest son of the sovereign the Prince of Wales. When did Edward die? In the year 1307, while on an invasion into Scotland. Who succeeded Edward I? Edward II, 1307 to 1327 AD. What Scotch king was his enemy? Robert Bruce. What battle was fought between them? The Battle of Bannockburn, where 100,000 English were defeated by 30,000 Scots. When was Scottish independence acknowledged? After 1328. After this, many wars arose between Scotland and England, but Scotland was never in danger of being conquered. What was the event of the 14th and the first half of the 15th century? The 100 Years' War with France. Who succeeded Edward II? His son, Edward III, aged 14, 1327 to 1377 AD. What great battle did Edward III fight? The Battle of Crécy, against the French. What did the English use in this battle? Gunpowder, the first they had used in warfare, 1346 AD. What was the result of this victory? The capture of Calais. Edward drove out the inhabitants and made it an English settlement. What did this do for the English? It gave them an open door into the heart of France. Who succeeded Edward III? Richard of Bordeaux, 1377 to 1399 AD. What was the character of his reign? Continual trouble with French and rebels at home. The first part of his reign is noted for an insurrection of the lower orders of the people, occasioned by the condition of serfdom in which they were kept. What did King Richard do? He met the people on Smithfield Commons, and as their leader had been slain, he boldly exclaimed, "I am your king. I will be your leader." What course did the Parliament take? They refused to ratify the king's pledges, and the insurrection was trodden out by the nobles. What great reformer lived during this reign? Wycliffe, called by some the morning star of the Reformation. He translated the Bible. What great poet lived then? Chaucer, styled the father of English poetry. He wrote the Canterbury Tales. Who succeeded Richard II? Henry IV, of the House of Lancaster, 1399 to 1413 AD. How long did the House of Lancaster rule? And who were the other kings? 62 years. Henry's 5th and 6th. What did Henry IV do? In order to give the discontented nobles war abroad, instead of leaving them to plot treason at home, Henry invaded France. What was the result? He met a vastly superior French force upon the plain of Agincourt and drove all before him. What was England's relation to France at this time? England controlled France until the year 1428, when the tide turned. What great battle or siege occurred in the year 1428? The Siege of Orleans, in France. Who was the heroine of this siege? Joan of Arc, a peasant girl. What did Joan of Arc do? Obtained command of the forces, and drove the English from their fortifications, and saved the city for the French. What became of the heroine? She was finally captured by the English, and condemned to be burned to death, 1431. What kind of sovereign was Henry VI? Very weak-minded, and finally became an imbecile. What new house of royalty was rising in England? The House of York. How long did the House of York rule? 24 years, by Edward's IV, V, and Richard III. What was commenced in 1455? The Wars of the Roses, between the Yorks and Lancasters, a struggle concerning the succession to the English throne. Why so called? The Yorkists wore a white rose, and the Lancasters a red one, as their symbols. What was the first battle? That of St. Albans, in which the king was wounded. How long did this war last? 30 years. 12 pitched battles were fought, and the ancient nobility of England almost annihilated. Who was the kingmaker? The Earl of Warwick, the greatest nobleman of the kingdom. His powerful influence in seating and unseating monarchs won him the title. When was printing introduced into England? In the year 1474, by Caxton of London, the first printed book being The Game and Plays of Chess. What was the first act of Richard III when he became king? He destroyed the young king, whose throne he had usurped, and his little brother, by an order that they should be smothered in their beds in the Tower. How did he die? He was slain on Bosworth Field by Henry Tudor, the last heir of the House Lancaster. How long did the House of Tudor reign? 118 years. Who were the kings of this house? Henry's 7th and 8th, and Edward the 6th. Who were the queens of the House of Tudor? Mary, wife of Philip of Spain, and Elizabeth. What was Elizabeth called? Good Queen Bess. What were the characteristic features of this period? The rise of Protestantism, the growth of commerce, and the development of learning and literature. What explorers were sent out by Henry VII? The Cabots, to America. What was the ruling passion of Henry VII? Avarice. He punished the nobles with fines on every pretext, and resorted to the most unjust and tyrannical exactions. Who succeeded Henry VII? Henry VIII, 1509 to 1547 AD. What effect did the crowning of Henry VIII have on the rival families of York and Lancaster? They were united. How many wives had Henry VIII? 6. Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. What were England's foreign relations at this time? It held the balance of power between Germany and France. Lest either should grow too strong, Henry always took the part of the one who happened at the time to be the weaker. Who was Henry's minister? Thomas Wolsey, the son of a butcher, who rose from a priest to the Archbishop of York, Lord Chancellor of England, Cardinal, and Papal Legate. What did Henry ask of the Pope? Permission to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, pretending that he had scruples of conscience because she was his brother's widow when he married her. Did the Pope sanction it? No. He hesitated, and the affair dragged on for years, and at last Henry privately married Anne Boleyn, Catherine's maid of honor, without papal permission. How did this step affect Cardinal Wolsey? Because he did not declare a divorce, the king banished him from court. Soon after he was arrested for treason, and he died broken-hearted while on his way to prison. What was the origin of the English Church? Henry's breach with the Pope. He now denied the Pope's supremacy, and Parliament declared the king the supreme head of the English Church. All who refused to take the oath of supremacy were proclaimed guilty of high treason. What was the character of Henry VIII? He was, without doubt, one of the most remorseless despots that ever reigned, though he never lost entirely the affection and esteem of his subjects. He persecuted both Protestants and Catholics, the former for rejecting his doctrines, the latter for denying his supremacy. What translation of the Bible was made? A copy of the Bible was translated by Tyndale and revised by Coverdale, and was ordered to be chained to a pillar or desk in every church. Who succeeded him? Edward VI, 1547 to 1553 A.D. How old was Edward? He was in his 10th year when he took the reign. What ecclesiastical changes took place under Edward? The Book of Common Prayer was compiled by Archbishop Cranmer and Bishop Ridley. The Latin Mass was abolished, and the pictures and statues in the churches destroyed. What persecution occurred? Many of those who refused to comply with the new liturgy were burned. Who succeeded Edward VI? Queen Mary, 1553 to 1558 A.D. What did she endeavor to do? Being an ardent Catholic, she sought to reconcile England to the Pope. What persecution took place? She revived the severe laws against heresy, and one of the most dreadful persecutions on record took place. Nearly 300 persons were burned at Smithfield, among them being Cranmer and Ridley. Whom did she marry? Her cousin Philip II of Spain. What name has she borne in history? Bloody Mary. Who succeeded Mary? What was her character? She had real strength and ability, but she was capricious, jealous, deceitful, and vain. What was the greatest blot upon her reign? The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. What led to a war with Philip II of Spain? The people of the Netherlands, having revolted against him in consequence of his dreadful oppressions, Elizabeth espoused their cause. What was the Invincible Armada? The immense fleet that Philip equipped with which to invade England. It consisted of 140 ships, bearing 3,000 guns and 27,000 men. What was its fate? It was attacked and partly destroyed by a much smaller fleet, and nearly all of the remaining vessels were wrecked off the coast of Scotland. What may be said of Elizabeth's reign? It was a great literary age. Name some of the great writers of this time. Shakespeare perfected the drama. Bacon developed a new philosophy. Spencer, Ben Jonson, and Marlowe gave form and harmony to poetry. What family ruled England during the 17th century? The Stuarts. What was the characteristic feature of this rule? The conflict between the kings bent upon absolute power and the Parliament contending for the rights of the people. Who succeeded Elizabeth? James I, 1603 to 1625, son of Mary, Queen of Scots. What is said of his reign? It was an age of voyage and discovery. What colony did him honor? The colony of Jamestown. What great war began in his time? The 30 Years' War, 1618 AD, in Central Europe. What was the Gunpowder Plot? The Catholics, disappointed in not receiving the religious liberty they had expected, resolved to blow up Parliament on the day of its opening by the king. 36 barrels of gunpowder were placed in a vault below the House of Lords, and they were to have been fired by Guy Fawkes, a Spanish officer. The plot was discovered on the eve of its execution. Who succeeded him? Charles I, 1625 to 1649. What war broke out during his reign? The Civil Wars. Who were the contending parties? The king and Parliament. Who supported the king? The clergy, the nobles, and the gay young men who disliked the Puritan strictness. Who supported Parliament? The Puritans, together with London and most of the cities. What two decisive battles were fought? Marston Moor and Naseby. What was the result? The king's party was defeated, and he was finally beheaded in the year 1649 AD. What kind of government now ruled? The Commonwealth, 1649 to 1660 AD. Who was the leader of the Commonwealth? Oliver Cromwell. What was Cromwell's rule? A military despotism. He desired to rule constitutionally, but Parliament proved troublesome and was dissolved. The people were weary of Puritan strictness, and Republican and Royalist alike plotted against their new tyrant. What religious body arose at this time? The Friends, or Quakers. They were persecuted for their teachings, and upon the founding of Pennsylvania, many emigrated thither. Who succeeded Cromwell? His son, Richard. When was the kingdom restored? May 1660 AD. Who was proclaimed king? Charles II, 1660 to 1685 AD. What was he nicknamed? The Merry Monarch. What reaction took place? From Puritan austerity, the people rushed to the opposite extreme of frivolity and revelry. The established church was restored, and 2,000 ministers were expelled from their pulpits as nonconformists. What was the year 1665 notable for? The Great Plague in London. Shops were shut, whole blocks stood empty, and grass grew in the streets. 100,000 people died of it in London, and large numbers in other places. What happened in 1666? A great fire raged for 3 days, and 200,000 people were driven to the open fields, homeless and destitute. What famous act was passed in 1679? The Habeas Corpus Act, which secured all subjects from imprisonment except where it could be shown to be justified by law. This was designed to check the arbitrary arrests made by the authority of the king. What famous writers lived during the reign of Charles II? John Milton, the author of Paradise Lost. John Bunyan, the author of Pilgrim's Progress. Samuel Butler, the author of Hudibras. John Locke, the author of Essay on the Human Understanding. And the poet Dryden. Who succeeded Charles II? His brother, James II, Duke of York, 1685 to 1688 AD. What became of James II? By his injustice, he was forced to fly to France. His chief aim was to restore Catholicism, and he resorted to illegal measures and persecution to accomplish it. Who succeeded James II? William and Mary of Orange, 1689 to 1694 AD. How was it accomplished? William, Prince of Orange, nephew of King James, and his wife Mary, daughter of the king, and a Protestant, took advantage of the popular indignation and came to England with a large fleet, where they were welcomed by the people. What important act was passed during their reign? The Bill of Rights, which guaranteed the people's liberty and fixed the government as a constitutional monarchy. Who was William III? William, by the death of Mary in 1694, became sole ruler, under the title of William III. What disturbed his reign? The plots of the Jacobites, the friends of James. Who succeeded William? Queen Anne, 1702 to 1714 AD. Good Queen Anne, as she was called, was the last of the Stuarts. When was the Union of England and Scotland? In 1707, under the name of Great Britain. It was the chief political event of Queen Anne's reign. What eminent writers lived at this period? Addison, Steele, Pope, Bolingbroke, and Swift. When did Anne die? Anne's health was very much affected by the dissensions of her ministers, and she died in 1714, having buried all of her 13 children. Who succeeded Anne? King George I of the House of Brunswick, 1714 to 1727 A.D. What does the political history of England under the Georges reveal? An increased power of the House of Commons and a bitter strife between Whigs and Tories. What did the Whigs favor? The rights of the people. What did the Tories support? The court and the royal prerogative. What caused an insurrection in Scotland during the reign of George I? The attempt of the Jacobites and the friends of the Stuarts to place the son of James II, called James the Pretender, on the throne. They were defeated, however. Who succeeded George I? His son, George II, 1727 to 1760 A.D. What war did the English carry on in America at this time? The French and Indian War, and it culminated in wresting Canada from the French. What religious body arose during this reign? The Methodists, called so from the zeal and methodic ways of a band of university men who met at Oxford for religious conversation and prayer. What great leaders belonged to it? Whitefield the preacher, Charles Wesley the sweet singer, and John Wesley the head and organizer of the movement. Who succeeded George II? His grandson, George III, 1760 to 1820 A.D. What is said of his reign? It was the longest of any English king. What great war occurred in his reign? The American Revolution. What hastened the Revolution? The character and unjust acts of the king. What was the result of the war? The independence of the United States and a war debt for Great Britain of £100 million. What became of George III? The last 10 years of his life he was insane, and finally died in 1820 AD. Who followed George III? His son was appointed regent when his father became insane and held office from 1811 to 1820 AD. Who succeeded George III as king? George IV, 1820 to 1830 AD. What is said of him? He was styled the first gentleman of Europe for his courtly manners and exquisite dress, but he was selfish and profligate. Who succeeded George IV? William IV, 1830 to 1837 AD. What was he called? The Sailor King, from having seen service in the Navy. His warm heart, open hand, and common sense won the love of England. Who succeeded him? Princess Victoria, daughter of the Duke of Kent, and niece of William IV, 1837 AD. Whom did Victoria marry? Her cousin Albert, of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. What has been the character of her reign? Generally peaceable. Who are the great free traders of England? Richard Cobden and John Bright. They held that every man should be free to buy in the cheapest market and to sell in the dearest without restriction. What forced a bill abolishing duties upon grain, cattle, etc.? The failure of the potato crop in Ireland, and the consequent famine. Into how many divisions is Parliament divided? 2. The Lords and Commons. Which house is elected by the people? The House of Commons. Who assists the sovereign in ruling? A cabinet of ministers or lords. If a proposed measure is lost by a vote of Parliament, what is the result? The ministry resign. The sovereign then sends for the leader of the opposition, who is requested to form a new cabinet. For what is the year 1830 memorable? The opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, upon which passenger cars were drawn by a locomotive engine, the invention of George Stephenson. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Avyndus.